WF Howells are celebrating their 20th year birthday, and Sean Melvin is joining me in the studio as you were the first employee of the company. Can you tell me about joining the company?
Yes, it was over 20 years ago. It was an interesting time. I was in the transition from a different industry and I'd seen the job advertised. I always was interested in audiobooks because it was something that I thought was beneficial and would improve people's lives. And from there, I had an interview with a gentleman called Ron Moody, who was the original MD. And after being given the role, I actually had my first meeting with him in his living room because at the time there was no actual offices before the company was produced. From there, we started off with recorded books titles only, and we had those for 8 or 9 months. Following on from that, we started with our first imprint of Clipper. Clipper's been an ongoing product ever since then, and the first title we ever did was Possession by A.S. Byatt. At that stage, we were doing 6 titles a month, and now we're in the position of releasing hundreds of titles a month in varying formats, be it physical stock, e-audio, e-books, MP3, Playaway. There's numerous different platforms now that people can get access to them.
You told me a really nice anecdote of the reason why you were attracted to the job in the newspaper at the beginning. What was the reason?
My grandfather in Ireland went blind later in life, and he'd been a massive reader. When he went blind, the one thing that he'd always loved doing was reading, and he lost access to books. At the time, there was abridged books available that were sent to him, and he'd get them once a month, but they were only short, 1 or 2 cassettes at the time, and he'd have them read within, or listened to within 2 or 3 hours, and then he had this dearth of material for another month. When I saw this job advertised, I thought, wow, that's amazing, because it's, instead of 90 minutes of a book, it's 12, 15, 18 hours, whatever it may be. And after getting the job, I regularly thought of my grandfather, and still do at times, and think, if only he was around now, I could provide him with unlimited access to audiobooks that would really improve his life. And that's why I really love this job, because what we're doing makes a big difference. A lot of it is people who are blind or partially sighted, but the big change that's happened over the last 20 years is now there's an awful lot of people who are sat in the car or on the tube or on the train, and it's a leisure activity as well as a necessity for some people, and that's the big change that's come about. And I've got to say, I love audiobooks myself, and I listen constantly. I probably spend on average 4 or 5 hours a day in the car, and I constantly have audiobooks on the go.
What is a day in the life of Sean? What are your duties? What do you do kind of throughout the day?
Well, again, that's changed, because the first 6 months of my job I spent completely lost. There was no such thing as sat-nav. So I had my diary and my area covered everywhere from Birmingham right up to Inverness. And I'd had a book and found out who all the different library authorities were. And I would be setting off from my home in Leeds, where I'm based, and I'd be going to Aberdeen or Inverness. And at the time, I'd have various different maps, and I'd pull out a map and look through it and try and figure the route, how to get there. Now, obviously, sat-nav makes life a lot easier, so you stick in the postcode and off you go. But generally speaking, I stay away from home Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. I'll make my way to an area, so if I'm off to Scotland, I'll plan a route, either up the East Coast or West Coast, that'll pull in a couple of library authorities, and then I'll get myself to a hotel that's close to where I want to be the following day. The following day, then I'll go and have 2 or 3 meetings with different library authorities and explain what we're doing, answer any questions they've got, and then move on for the following day. So generally speaking, I leave home Tuesday morning, I get home Friday evening time.
And do you do talks in libraries as well as kind of travelling around?
Yeah, there's a real mixture. So, for example, last week I had meetings with various libraries. Some of it was talking about what's happening in the CD world or the large print world. Some of it was talking about digital developments, and now we've got video on demand services that weren't there in the past. The RB Digital app is evolving all the time, so it's keeping people informed. But then on Friday, I was in Stockport with a a blind group. Now, this is an organisation that look after and help people who are blind and who are deaf and who have specific issues. It's not just about audiobooks. So people were coming in with the latest iPhone or Android phone, and they were having problems getting them set up for what they needed, and they had experts there who were helping them out. These groups of people meet every month, and they really help out people with all sorts of things. So if they have a problem with their bills or whatever, they'll find out who they need to go to. And that's the library being the library are involved in it, but this separate organisation, they're a real service to help people who need a little bit of support to do what they need to do. And I was along at that to explain to people how the app could work for them and the benefits it could bring to them. So it really is mixed, what I do. And that's why after over 20 years, I still find it interesting and love the job.
Apart from the amount of books that we're producing, how else has the company changed over the last 20 years?
Unbelievably so. I mean, when I started off, there was 4 people in the company. We had some headquarters in Rothley. We were there. It was a small block, and we were there for 2 or 3 years. We then moved into the same place, but the next building, it was 3 times the size, and we rapidly outgrew that. We then moved across the road from where we are now, and that was about 10 times the size. And then about 5 years ago, we moved to here. So as far as physical's concerned, we've gone from 4 people, and at one stage, I think we've got somewhere between 30 and 40 people working for the company. There's a big development. But as far as physical and digital products goes, initially when I started, there was only cassettes. So I'd go in with 6 cassettes and say to people, would you like to buy these? And that's basically how it was. Within 4 or 5 years, CDs had come along, and CDs was seen as the future. Everyone thought cassettes will disappear within 12 or 18 months. The reality was cassettes were still around 10 years later. And that's because cassettes were very useful for people who were blind or partially sighted, because the cassette would stay where it was, the CD would go back to the beginning if you took it out. Following on from that, we got Playaway, which is a small little sealed unit that has an audiobook on it. And then we had MP3 discs, so instead of having 15 CDs, you've got the whole book on 2 or whatever. And then that evolved to e-audio, where you can download the audiobook and have a listen via your phone or your computer or your MP3 or however you feel like doing it.
Do you think there'll be a time where digital will take over the CD market?
I think it will. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but it will come along. I don't think anybody can really say when that will be, but when you look at how technology is moving on so fast, that who knows where it'll be in 5 years. So 5 years ago, you couldn't have imagined being able to watch a streamed video on a phone that you make phone calls on and do texts and everything else. You couldn't have imagined that the buses would be Wi-Fi'd up, or city centres, and some city centres now are, where there's free Wi-Fi everywhere. So it's not just that the technology is moving on, but the industry behind it's moving on as well. So everything's lending itself to that digital format. But the reality is, somebody who's 90 years of age and who has used CDs for years and never used a computer, it's not going to work for them. The best will in the world, it won't work. Although it is getting simpler to use this technology, which again is an evolution. But I think certain people will always want them. But people who are 50 years of age now, as I am in a couple of weeks, we've grown up with computers and technology. So it's second nature, and it won't be a problem. And certainly kids coming through now, there'll be no issues whatsoever.
You work very closely with Simon. What's your relationship with him, and how has that developed over the years? Because he's also started the same kind of time as you, didn't he?
He did. It's quite interesting. In certain ways, we're a bit like an old married couple. We bicker quite a bit. We both have strong opinions on things, but we get on very, very well. So when I got married, Simon came from Chichester, which is 300 odd miles to my wedding. I went down to London for his 50th birthday. And at one stage we were saying we spent more time talking to each other on the phone than we do our wives. So yeah, it is interesting. He's a great fella, and I think we've learnt a lot off each other over the years.
And how does his job differ from yours, or is it generally quite similar?
It's very similar. It's just a different location. So he looks after London and the south coast for a lot of the time, and my area, as I said, is the north and Scotland. And then we've got Lorraine, who looks after the Midlands, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland. So there's actually 3 in the team working together. But Lorraine's been with the company for about 4 or 5 years now.
And do you listen to audiobooks yourself? Do you have any favourites?
I do. I love audiobooks. And the one thing it brought me more than anything was I was a typical guy before I got this job. I used to read an awful lot of non-fiction. And that's what my interest was. I actually find that since I got this job, I wanted to learn about different types of books and different genres. So I've tried everything. And the reality is my favourite genre a few years ago, while it was still more evolved than it is now, was chick lit. So Marion Keyes is my favourite author. It's not aimed at 50-year-old guys, but it's just very funny, entertaining stuff. And the breadth of my reading now, I'll always read different things. And I quite enjoy some of the children's books as well, because again, it's a different approach to writing, and it's a different way that it comes across. So I'll really try anything. And one other thing that I do now is if I listen to a book or I'm reading a book and I don't like it, I'll turn it off. I won't finish it. People sometimes think if they start a book they have to finish it. For me, it's enjoyment and entertainment. If I'm not enjoying it, then I just get rid of it. Although I have to say it's very rare that happens.
And it's really wonderful, isn't it, with audiobooks, that you can listen to things that you would never go into a bookshop and choose a book of that genre. It might actually expand the breadth of books that you're going to listen to.
It really does. And you can actually listen at a higher level than you can read. That's been proven. So there's books that may be unattainable for you to actually sit down and physically read it. But if you listen to it, your comprehension is at a different level, and you can understand things to a different degree.
Will you go for a book because of the author or because of the narrator?
Again, that varies. There's certain authors who I like, but I like to mix it up when it comes to the authors. There's certain narrators that I thoroughly enjoy, and that is a personal thing. And one of the things I've found visiting libraries is with hearing difficulties, because it's not just a visual thing. A lot of people who listen are older, so their eyesight's gone, but their hearing may be on the way as well. So some people listen to a deep male voice and they can hear it very well. Other people like a high-pitched female voice, depending on the hearing damage and loss that they've got.
Audiobooks do a really amazing job within the community, don't they, for people who want to still read and have difficulties.
They do, and it works for children as well. My daughter's dyslexic, so we listen to a lot of audiobooks, and that's helping improve her vocabulary and her understanding of words and where they sit within sentences and sentence structure and everything else. They bring an awful lot that people don't even realise is going on around them, and you're just sat there listening, but you're taking things in without even being aware of it.
Thank you so much for your time, Sean.
Okay.
Happy birthday to W. Howes and happy birthday to Sean.
Thank you.